Look at the person who gives up their place in line, even though they themselves are running late. Look at the one who listens to a colleague's hour-long venting session while their own head is splitting open. Look at the person who smiles and says, "It's okay," when they are betrayed, because they rationalize it, thinking the betrayer simply had a difficult childhood. Since childhood, we have been told that kindness is the highest human virtue, that good deeds always return to you, that the light within you will inevitably illuminate the path for others. But if you look at the real world without those childhood illusions, you will notice a strange and brutal pattern. The kindest people are often the most exhausted, the most lonely, and the most broken. The person who never refuses anyone goes to bed with a heaviness they never intended to carry. The person who forgives everything gradually loses the ability to protect their own space. While egoists build careers, draw strict boundaries, and fall asleep without a single anxious thought, the kind person lies awake at 3 in the morning, replaying someone else's pain and wondering if they accidentally offended someone with a poorly chosen word. Why does this happen? Why does a system that praises mercy in words, in reality, methodically crush those who practice it? This is not an accident, nor is it just bad luck. It is a fundamental paradox of the human psyche and the structure of our society, the curse of having no skin. The English philosopher Thomas Hobbes once noted that the natural state of humanity is a war of all against all. To survive this war, evolution equipped us with psychological armor. We learn to be indifferent. We walk past the homeless. We turn away from someone else's tears. We set up an invisible filter between ourselves and the chaos of external suffering. But for a kind person, this filter is either unformed or broken. In neurobiology, there's a concept called mirror neurons, cells in the brain that force us to experience other people's emotions as if they were happening to us. When a cruel or pragmatic person sees someone else's pain, their brain merely registers a fact. When a kind-hearted person sees someone else's pain, their brain fires the exact same neural pathway as the victim's. A kind person does not just know that someone is hurting, they physically live through that hurt. Arthur Schopenhauer, in his essay On the Basis of Morality, wrote that true compassion is the ability to erase the boundary between the self and the non-self. For a kind person, another's suffering becomes their own. But in a world where suffering is generated by billions of people every single second, being a person without skin means condemning yourself to continuous background microtrauma. The egoist is protected by their own egocentrism. The kind person, however, is open to all winds. They operate as an emotional sponge, absorbing other people's anxiety, anger, and despair, hoping to process it all internally and return pure light to the world. But every filter has a capacity limit, and when the sponge overfills, it begins to disintegrate from within. The just world trap and the evolution of parasitism. In the 1960s, psychologist Melvin Lerner described a phenomenon known as the just world hypothesis. It is a fundamental cognitive error embedded in us since childhood. We believe the world is structured logically and righteously. If you do good, the world will reward you with good. If you cause pain, karma will catch up with you. The kind person becomes a hostage to this illusion. They sincerely believe that their self-sacrifice is a deposit earning interest in the bank of the universe. But the universe does not keep accounting records. The universe is indifferent. From the perspective of game theory and evolutionary biology, a cooperative, highly empathetic individual in a society is a free resource. In biological systems, if a resource appears that can be consumed without reciprocity and without the risk of punishment, an ecosystem of parasites immediately forms around it. When you display absolute kindness without boundaries, you do not cultivate gratitude in others. You teach them exploitation. The egoist clearly dictates the price of their time and resources. If you try to take more than your share from them, you will face aggression or a firm refusal. The kind person does not fight back. They look for the cause of someone else's insolence within themselves, and those around them, often without even realizing it on a rational level, begin to push the kind person harder and harder. Not because they are evil, but because water always flows where there is the least resistance. The kind person finds themselves in a trap. They expect their kindness to elicit reciprocal kindness, but instead it only elicits an increase in demand. And when their resources are entirely depleted, they face the most sobering realization of all. The moment a kind person says no just once, society immediately labels them an egoist, the shadow and blocked anger. But the most terrible suffering of a kind person does not come from the outside. It is born within. Carl Gustav Jung introduced the concept of the shadow to psychoanalysis, the part of our personality where we repress all unacceptable impulses, aggression, anger, selfishness, jealousy, and the desire to tell everyone to just leave us alone. An ordinary person lets their shadow out from time to time. They can argue, show teeth, or defend their territory. A kind person has convinced themselves that the shadow is inherently evil. They are terrified of their own anger. They believe that if they show resentment, they will cease to be a good person. But anger is not evil. Anger is the immune system of the psyche. It is a natural signal that your boundaries have been violated. What happens to an immune system when it is blocked? The body begins to attack itself. When a kind person feels a righteous anger towards someone who is using them, they immediately suppress the impulse and feel a deep sense of guilt for even daring to get angry. The anger does not disappear. It turns 180 degrees inward and becomes autoaggression. This manifests as psychosomatic pain, chronic burnout, anxiety disorders, and a background sense of inadequacy. The kind person does not suffer because others do not love them. They suffer because they have forbidden themselves from protecting who they are. Reevaluating kindness as weakness versus kindness as strength. This brings us to the most crucial question. Does all of this mean that kindness is a mistake? That one should become cynical, cold, and care only about oneself? To answer this, we must draw a line between two things that we constantly confuse: people-pleasing and conscious kindness. What most people call kindness is often just a fear of conflict. It is an inability to tolerate someone else's displeasure. It is a childish need to be a good boy or a good girl so you won't be rejected. If your kindness stems from an inability to say no, it is not kindness. It is cowardice wrapped in a moral blanket. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche was brutal but accurate when he opened his contemporaries' eyes to the fact that a weak, defenseless nature often labels its own inability to resist as mercy. A rabbit is not kind because it doesn't eat the wolf. It simply has no teeth. True kindness has nothing to do with a lack of teeth. True kindness is the choice of the strong. It is when you possess the power to refuse, to break a relationship, to respond harshly, to exhibit aggression, but you consciously choose not to do so where it is truly needed. Real kindness always relies on rigid boundaries. It is not handed out to everyone for free. It is offered from a solid foundation of one's own dignity. The invisible choice. Søren Kierkegaard wrote that a human's deepest suffering begins where they realize the vast gap between how the world is and how it ought to be. The kind person suffers the most, not because they are foolish, and not because the world is cursed. They suffer because they carry the weight of realizing this gap. They have tried to build an island of order and warmth in an ocean of chaos, using their own soul as the building material. The dog sleeping in the sun knows nothing of the world's cruelty. The egoist knows about it, but participates in it for their own gain. Yet, the kind person knows everything about the cruelty of the world, and still chooses to be gentle. This is not weakness. This is the hardest and most dangerous labor on this planet. And if you are currently feeling depleted by your own kindness, remember one simple fact. You cannot pour from an empty cup. True mercy begins not with sacrificing yourself to others, but with being kind to yourself. Because if the light inside you goes out, the world will not just become darker. It will lose one more person who proved that amid all the selfishness and noise, it is still possible to remain human.